How is everyone? Welcome to Mystery Monday number 33. At the end of today's story, you will be asked to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 4 relating to your ability to make inferences in the text. What does that mean to make an inference from the text? That means that you're able to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support an analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as making inferences drawn from the text, including where the text leaves matters uncertain. That scale is as follows. If you rate yourself a 4, this is above and beyond. This is like saying, Doimer, let me take over. I can stand in front of class. I can teach this stuff. You can draw inferences from the text. You can point to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point. And you can point to where the text is matters uncertain. You're also able to pick up on nuance like sarcasm and irony. If you're at a 3, that means that you are right where we want you to be. You're meeting standard. You are at grade level. You're doing everything right. That means that you can draw inferences from the text. You can point to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and you're able to look at where the text leaves matters uncertain. But the one thing you might be missing is picking up on that nuance like sarcasm and irony. If you're at a 2, that means like if the teacher is sitting right with you, you got it. When the teacher's sitting there talking you through it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But as soon as a teacher walks away and you're kind of left on your own to figure it out, based on your own understanding, you might be missing some pieces. So that means you're at a 2. I just finished a college class where that was me. I felt as though I really understood it when the teacher was talking through it, and then as soon as I had to go do my own reading, I had to send an email because I just didn't quite understand. So that's normal. That's okay. And if you're at a 1, that means that you're not sure of how to draw inferences from the text, which is also okay. Please tell me that. The honesty here is important because it tells me what I can do better to help you understand this particular standard, what I can do while reading so that I know maybe I can highlight some character changes, some irony, some turning points in the text, things that happen in the story that lead us to those inferences that maybe I can scaffold for you. Today's story is titled Investigating an Explosion. At the end of the story, there will be a question here, here, and here. You will have to answer those according to what we've read, and then at the end, you'll be asked to rank your ability to make those inferences. Along the way, you will see vocabulary words, and I got a little bit of adjusting formatting to do here. Colleague is your first one, intently is your second one, and siege is your third one. Only 3 vocab words today. And let's get started. Investigating an Explosion. Mystery Monday number 33. There, Marnie Rance pointed to the markings inked onto the large piece of plate glass, being careful not to touch them. Right there, she said. Now that's a swastika, isn't it? Or most of one, anyway. I bet we'll find the one little piece of missing line where we find the rest of the door. Doug Doyle nudged the glass ever so slightly with the toe of one of his gleaming Oxfords. He was the only member of the bomb squad who never wore sneakers or construction boots, and he was famous for being able to crawl around an explosion site for days without ever having to rehabilitate a shoe shine. Doug looked at the markings and wrinkled his nose slightly. He didn't appear convinced. And here, Marnie pointed, at some more marks a few inches above the swastika. This looks like it was probably another one, but it got smeared by the sprinkler system. She bent at the knees and squatted closer to the wreckage lying beneath her and Doug. There were 3 pieces of glass from the shattered front door, each about the size of a large dinner plate. 2 of them still clung, one beside the other, to one side of the wooden door frame, directly above the door knob. The third one was slightly larger, attached to a different piece of frame. This third one had the swastika. The blast had been a fairly small one, taking out the ornate front door of a large private home and much of the outside living room wall on one side, along with the piece of the garage on the other side. Looks very professional, the fire chief had said to Doug Doyle when he arrived a few minutes ago. As if it's a message, sort of. Most of the force appears to have been horizontal, very controlled. Could have been a lot worse. Marnie stood up and drew her shoulders back to stretch them, waiting for Doug to comment. He was staring at the glass. The swastika, if indeed it was one, was about the size of an adult's hand, and it had been drawn with magic marker or some kind of felt-tip pen. Freehand, and hastily, too. Doug took a sharp breath as though he was about to say something, but instead, he held his breath and then exhaled slowly. Marnie spoke instead. What I want to know is if you're thinking what I'm thinking. I mean, this was a real professional pop here. Whoever did this knew what he was doing with plastic. It was plastic, by the way, if you couldn't tell first thing. And then the swastika. I mean, on first impression, it's hard to get around the idea that some Nazi types were busy here. Marnie squatted down again and motioned Doug to do likewise. But now look at what doesn't make any sense. She took out a ballpoint pen and with the blunt end drew a circle on the glass around the swastika, as though to confine the symbol permanently to that one spot. What doesn't seem to make sense, she went on, is that the arm's bent the wrong way on this one. Isn't a swastika supposed to go clockwise? The ends of the arm, I mean? These are counterclockwise. Doug spoke for the first time. Is all the photography finished? He said. Marnie nodded, just a bit perplexed. Then try this perspective, Doug Doyle said gently as he picked up the piece of glass and turned it over. Now it's clockwise, right? The way it's supposed to be? Marnie reddened, but before she could say anything, Doug set the glass down and touched her elbow so that both of them would stand up. The fact is, she said, swastikas can go either way, clockwise or counterclockwise. When Hitler adopted the symbol, he picked up the former direction. Doug looked at his watch at his young colleague. Her interest appeared genuine, so he continued. It's a very ancient symbol, really, and quite widespread. The Hindu and Buddhist traditions have it. You would have found it in Mexico, too, long before the Europeans came. Ever heard of Heinrich Schliemann, the guy that found Troy in the 1870s? He also found swastikas there. I believe he was the first to refer to them as the Aryan religious symbol, although there's no evidence that Schliemann himself was a racist. Marnie was listening intently, but by now Doug was on a roll and her interest no longer made much difference. Actually, it's generally believed that swastikas were intended to have a benign purpose, to represent the motion of the sun, most archaeologists think. It's only after Hitler that the swastika became tainted, culturally. Doug squatted down, just as Marnie had done, traced a circle around the swastika on the glass with the blunt end of his ballpoint pen. He continued, without changing his tone even a little. There's an interesting legend about the Crusaders and the swastika. The story has it that they were laying siege to a fortress, somewhere in the Middle East, I don't know where, and as a ploy, the inhabitants had their women place their bare butts over the edge of the fortress wall just to show the brave knights how much they cared about the siege, and all the bottoms had swastikas painted on them. For the first time, Marnie's expression changed. Doug's didn't. He kept on staring at the swastika. I'm not making that up, he added. There really is such a story, but anybody who believes that would also believe that some Nazi types are responsible for this bomb blast here. Why does Doug Doyle suspect that this explosion was not set by what he and Marnie call Nazi types? So according to Doug, despite the fact that there's a swastika, this was not set by Nazi types. How does he know? Alright, I'm going to take just a couple seconds and try to answer a few of the questions for you. Talk through them at least. This is right when they get to the scene. Marnie squatted down and motioned to Doug to do likewise. But now look at what doesn't make any sense. She took out a ballpoint pen and with the blunt end drew a circle on the glass around the swastika, as though to confine the symbol permanently to that one spot. What doesn't seem to make sense, she went on, is that the arms bend the wrong way on this thing. Isn't a swastika supposed to go clockwise? The ends of the arms, I mean? These are counterclockwise. Doug spoke for the first time. Is all the photography finished, he said? Marnie nodded, just a bit perplexed. Then try this perspective, Doug Doyle said gently as he picked up the piece of glass and turned it over. Now it's clockwise, right? The way it's supposed to be? Marnie reddened, but before she could say anything, Doug set the glass down and touched her elbow so that both of them would stand up. Now, here's a question of inference. Why did Marnie redden? Redden, of course, meaning that she blushed. Her face got red. Why did she redden? Then we go into this next paragraph where he being Doug, starts to tell a lot about the history of the swastika, going back to the 1870s, different cultures, this and that. And the author writes, Marnie was listening intently, but by now, Doug was on a roll and her interest no longer made a difference. So here's my question to you. How do you know that Doug is passionate about this, or at least knowledgeable. Alright, and here is the solution to Mystery Monday number 33, investigating the explosion. Because the blast came from inside the house, it must have been set up to look like Nazi types were responsible. Doug Doyle's clue comes from the direction of the swastika and the smear from the sprinkler system. This is in part why Marnie's face reddened. Although swastikas can be both clockwise and counterclockwise, as Doug pointed out, the Nazi Party in Germany chose a clockwise rotation. Therefore, if a swastika were to be applied to the inside of the glass door in order to appear as though it had been put on from the outside, the artist, terrorist question mark, would have done it counterclockwise. Granted, a careful investigation would certainly reveal which side of the glass held the symbol. However, Marnie says that on the first impression, it appears some Nazi types are involved, and that may have been all the bomb setter wanted to do. Besides, if the door were sufficiently shattered, a less than utterly precise examination might miss the fact. Where the scheme broke down was in the smearing by the sprinkler system. The sprinklers must be inside, of course, and would have come on after the blast. If the water fell on the markings and smeared them, the door would have to have been blasted outward. This is why Doug is suspicious. So, let's start at the bottom. Why does Doug Doyle suspect that this explosion was not set by what he and Marnie call Nazi types? It's because of the way the swastika is. If it had to be inside and it was smeared, when he flipped it and Marnie's face reddened, it became counterclockwise, which is opposite of the way that Nazis use the swastika, according to what Doug tells us. How would you change your answer that you wrote the first time that I asked this question? How does the audience know that Doug is knowledgeable and probably passionate about the history of the swastika? Well, because in the story, it says that he kind of lost Marnie. Marnie stopped paying attention, but it didn't make any difference. Have you ever been talking passionate about something and somebody else, it's almost like they lose interest, but you don't care. You just keep talking and telling your story because you're just so into it and you care so much. Well, that's Doug. He's knowledgeable and passionate. Marnie's face reddens because it's kind of like reading a book upside down. She didn't realize that the pane of glass was facing the wrong way. He did. He corrected her. She felt a little bit silly. And here is our scale. Where would you rate your ability to draw inferences? Would you consider yourself a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1? If you're at a 4, that means that you picked up on the reddening of the face and Marnie losing interest right away, because there's a bit of irony there. But if you're able to kind of visualize that in your head, the pane of glass being forward and backward, and recognizing that for an explosion to go off inside, there must have been a sprinkler system inside. If you can make all those connections, you're at a 3. If you can kind of say it has to do with the swastikas and there's something about the pain, but I can't make sense of it, you're at a 2. And if you're not quite sure, how to make sense of what happened in the story, you're at a 1, which is okay. Remember, like we said at the beginning of the video, let me know so that I can help explain that stuff mid-reading so that we can get everybody to a 3. So a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. Thank you. That is all I have for you today. Upon completion of this video, you will have earned 1 unit. And so, ciao for now.